Hello, today is Friday, July 17th. Welcome to episode 616 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed, one time a week, on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson. I'm joined today by NSI Senior Fellow John Lipsey and FDD, that's the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Senior Advisor Rich Goldberg. For those of you who are listening to this, John and I go way back. Rich and I go way back. There's going to be some inside jokes that may not land. I apologize in advance. But ostensibly, we're here to talk about the current situation with Iran. We want to kind of do a deeper dive with our friend Rich Goldberg, who has worked on the Iran issue for decades now. And is a genuine expert on the U.S. government's approach to the challenge of Iran. He worked on this issue in the White House. He worked on this issue on Capitol Hill. He is currently in the private sector giving people very good advice for a reasonable fee, is my understanding. And I think he continues to work on it as an expert affiliated with FDD and indeed other organizations. So we're really thrilled to have Rich with us. Of course, John Lipsey has been bugging me with more deep thoughts on Iran, even than Rich does. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Rich, I want to let you have a cut here on the situation, in particular with the Strait of Hormuz. And I don't want to kind of reiterate everything that's happened over the last few months, but we're kind of back at hostile actions between the U.S. and Iran. Other countries are involved, of course. The U.S. is blockading the Strait of Hormuz while also escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz. It's quite complicated. One of the real questions here is, what is going to be the impact of that on the energy markets and the price of gas and the price of oil and things like that? Can you give us like a kind of a status of how things are right now? Not in terms of, is President Trump communicating well, or is he achieving his goals, or should he have consulted more with Congress, or what does he look like compared to Obama? All interesting questions. But let's talk about like what's actually happening on the water, as it were, as ships are either or are not going through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, so I think the best way to think about this is there is some amount of damage and accomplishment that occurred as a result of Operation Epic Fury with respect to any remaining aspects of a nuclear program from last year's Operation Midnight Hammer and Israel's 12-day war to more, sort of the more prominent focus of this round of military action being the missile program, and in particular the industrial base behind the missile program, the manufacturing capacity of their missiles. That is sort of bagged, okay? So we can measure what we think the damage has been, how long it will take them to rebuild certain capabilities over time. That is sort of in the back of your mind. Then as you move forward into ceasefire period, you had a situation where the United States had oil prices hovering around $100, and at certain points, going up, maybe a little bit down, but really not coming down. Shipping was not moving through the Strait of Hormuz at the end of major military operations. Shippers were waiting for some kind of signal of, we're really cleared to go. Iran's not going to fire at us. The Americans are here to protect us. Nobody had really, moved through the strait successfully on a sustained period and had confidence in restarting shipping, and therefore prices were not falling as much as they could. And on the Iranian side, they were demanding certain things to be able to get on their side the economic relief that had been building up on their side of pressure because an American blockade had been imposed after we had gone to ceasefire, as everybody saw. And so in order to get that blockade lifted, get their own oil out to market, try to reap some benefit, start getting some money into their economy, understanding they took an incredible amount of economic blows, not just military blows, in the course of the campaign. This was, in their view, this windfall that would come to them. And this was the MOU that everybody talked about, the Memorandum of Understanding. And there was swirling controversy, people against it, people for it, people not sure, wait and see. I was in the skeptical wait and see mode. sort of understanding the need to get the Strait of Hormuz open, but wanting to see the downside of it limited as much as possible to limit the benefit to the regime. That is basically what has occurred. And what's happened over the last few weeks under cover of this MOU is that the shipping community took the signal of the MOU to say it's clear for us to start moving. And they started moving. And you saw oil prices come down dramatically, by about $30 pretty quickly. And we saw WTI, which we care about most in the United States, fall under the even get below $70, which is
WTI is West Texas Intermediate Crude.
Correct.
Yes,
and that's
what
our gas prices and everything is pegged on here. Brent for the rest of the world market, what a lot of the markets look at, and typically there is a spread where WTI is lower than Brent. But for our purposes, if you're in the White House, you're looking at WTI, as your indicator of how we're doing. And when WTI was above $100, you saw the president, communicating that, well, it's going to be over real soon. We might have a deal here, and you'd see WTI fall back into the 90s. And then if the Iranians would escalate and WTI would start going back up, you'd have to go back to that. So that's really the benchmark that we've always seen the White House react to politically, as far as how they want to maneuver. But with prices falling, and therefore gas prices falling alongside it, not as fast, but still pretty significantly, the president had sort of opened up that pressure that was building on himself. And it allowed also the U.S. Navy to start moving around and doing things under cover of the MOU, under cover of true ceasefire, to be better positioned to offer additional escort to shippers as they're starting to get moving through in case the Iranians try to interrupt the flow. Well, sure enough, what happens here? The Iranians realize that they're not getting all the money unfrozen from accounts the way that they thought they were going to be. Even with the oil that's moving out to market with the blockade being lifted, they're not finding buyers for the oil. Even the Chinese are not coming back at the levels they were pre-war. And so the IRGC elements that were opposed to doing the deal in the first place are like, what are we doing here? Why are we letting Trump get away, with opening the strait and relieving all of his pressure? Let's start firing on ships and send the price of oil back up, shut the strait back down, and shake him down for more. Meanwhile, these talks that have been going on about the nuclear side have gone absolutely nowhere. Supposedly they were going to let inspectors in to damage sites. We've seen no progress on that. So this idea of this grand bargain that was in the offing, I don't think any people like me certainly thought that was going to happen, especially when you start giving relief to the regime, but certainly did not materialize. Now you're in the situation where we've sort of backed ourselves into that Project Freedom that the president tried to do before the MOU, which would have put him in a position to keep the shipping lanes open, get oil to market, while keeping a blockade on Iran, squeezing them as hard as possible, and still being able to defend against Iran's retaliation as much as possible against the Gulf, against Gulf infrastructure. What we've basically seen happen is, even though Project Freedom was cut off in its infancy within 24 hours by apparently Arab governments denying us airspace because they were afraid that participating in it would incur the wrath of the Iranians and have direct retaliation against various Gulf oil infrastructure, water desalination plants, etc. We have actually, had Project Freedom come to life. We're doing it right now. There are ships that are moving, even under fire, every night through the Strait of Hormuz, bringing out millions of barrels of oil. The Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, saying 15 million barrels on average coming out even under fire over the last few nights. We will see if that sustains itself. That's why so far you've only seen, as the MOU breaks down and the Iranians keep firing missiles and we're firing back, the price of oil isn't back up at 90 or even 100. WTI is hovering right around 80. It breaks 80, it comes back down. Now that could change very quickly depending on where the Iranians go and what happens here. But for the moment, the blockade is back, and that's bad for the Iranians. Their imports are cut off once again. Their exports are also cut off. What tankers they had to just pile oil this way and that way on their storage issues are out to sea, and they're not being allowed back in empty. So they're not going to have anywhere to really store their oil the way that they had before on ships out in the Gulf. So that's going to be creating this increasing pressure on the regime once again, with question marks of what is that runway? Well, that's not transparent to us. When will banks fail? When will people not get paid? What will happen inside the economy there? Meanwhile, our military is facilitating the continued movement of ships, which was not happening before the MOU. That's keeping the price of oil down and keeping political pressure, at least for now, off the president. And our military appears to be targeting something CENTCOM thinks is smart to target on a nightly basis, sometimes during the day. I think we're by the time this airs, we'll have done 5 nights in a row of strikes, and we're targeting the coastal areas of Iran, coastal capabilities, that which Iran is using to target the Gulf. We're targeting the islands that surround the Strait of Hormuz. We haven't really seen a lot of inland attacks. We've seen one-off attacks on critical infrastructure like bridges, almost like warning signs. We haven't seen real command and control attacks, things like that against the IRGC itself. We haven't seen attacks in Tehran or anywhere we think the leadership is. Could be coming. Depends on how high the escalation ladder the president wants to go right now. But my read at the moment, obviously, things can change very quickly depending on targets of opportunity and how he feels about the United States military's ability to defend against what the Iranians have left to fight back with. But for now, the president seems to be keeping the Iranians in this sort of medium escalation moment where there are people in the regime who don't want this to continue. They want to get back to the blockade being lifted. They fear the economy falling apart. They wanted to have the MOU, and not allowing the IRGC elements that wanted to break the MOU to have a pretext to hyper escalate and just start firing willy-nilly at every tanker everywhere and every Gulf energy facility, and trying to even reach the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea and Yanbu and things like that, where the Saudis have their pipelines coming out, Fujairah for the UAE coming out of Oman. We're not seeing that level of targeting. This is still this one-off, hitting ships and retaliating against U.S. military infrastructure in the Gulf in response to American attacks on Iranian military infrastructure. That's the frame of it right now. I think in net, that's pretty good for the United States because the noose is tightening on the regime. We're getting oil out to market. And obviously the question then is, how long do the Iranians have of this kind of capability? How long does it take CENTCOM to actually degrade their capability? What are we hitting every night? Is it being effective? Is it being successful? Is there going to be a point where we say, my goodness, we've hit the coastal areas, we've hit these cities, we've hit these islands, 10 times now, and it's not changing the capability to threaten the Gulf. It's not changing the equation here. Something else has to change. Are we really able to stay in this sort of constant crisis mode, managed medium level crisis mode, prolonged for a number of months, expending munitions both on the defensive side and offensive side, having this be in the news politically, even if you're not seeing crisis moments on the price of oil? Or will there be a point where the president says, I need to have additional optionality here to potentially, if there's an opportunity, decapitate the current leadership, start over with somebody else, covert operations to support the people in something that we don't see materializing, or also military options on the nuclear side that are potentially in the offing with some of the sites that have not been hit in the past that we see Iranian activity at that may be still in the target set. That's a lot to react to, Les. It's a lot to react to. Fire away.
John, you get the first shot.
I think so. I think that's great analysis. I think that picture is well painted for exactly where we are. I think that the big question which you laid out is the question of how long, or to the extent that this is sort of an Anaconda strategy, we are sort of starting to constrict slowly, methodically, that we are tightening the noose, but maintaining this sort of low ebb level of kinetic action, something that we seem to so far be able to manage from a defensive standpoint. Um, and that Iran is so far not trying to take it doesn't seem go up the escalation ladder. They're resigning themselves to taking shots mostly at U.S. Base infrastructure in the region, as opposed to going after Gulf energy infrastructure, which they had started to really do in earnest before the ceasefire. Um, uh, I think that is the question. Can we sustain that? At what point? Either to your point, it's either proven to be unsuccessful in keeping the strait open enough, or it's very too successful, perhaps with Iran, and they then feel like they have to escalate. And then, have we learned an ability to um, defend against the asymmetric advantage that they've had with drones and the like, that we clearly, at least before the ceasefire demonstrated, we were not able to defend the region in the way that we need to sustain the campaign and to keep allies on side. What's your assessment of that as we go, or what's your best guess of what it looks like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a lot of factors here and some knowledge gaps that we can only try to glean from open source, but we just don't have granularity. And so it's one of those we'll see based on what is actually the reality. Number one, I think there is a phenomenon of the Gulf states fighting back. We're seeing some hint of that in the open source, that when they're attacked, if their critical infrastructure is attacked, if they're attacked directly, not an attack on a U.S. base, but an attack on some sort of infrastructure of the country, there is some group of countries that are not going public, and it's not being publicly assigned by the U.S. military. But if you read enough of the open source, it does seem like the Emiratis of the world are retaliating when hit. And this may be something that the regime worries about, that there is now a coalition of the willing. It's not just the U.S. military. This is the Gulf together. Interesting factoid about this. We have not seen the Iranians hit Israel since a return to escalation. That's really interesting, right? We assess from open source that they may have hundreds, if not 1,000, medium-range ballistic missiles left, after firing a couple thousand off or getting a lot destroyed. Some number of launchers, likely still in the hundreds, if not 100, that would allow them to fire a lot of them off. They're not doing it. They've been threatened by the Israelis that there's going to be some overwhelming response that is planned potentially at their energy infrastructure against something else, and this would be giving them the pretext for it. Maybe they fear decapitation. A lot of these leaders came out for the supreme leader's funeral. They were above ground finally, walking around. They have to believe Mossad is tracking them.
Well, I would add, Rich, at the start of the MOU, Iran did try to make Israel the issue with Hezbollah and Lebanon, and make that the central front of the sort of battle over the MOU, and try to drive a wedge between the U.S. and Israel. Rubio seems to have solved that issue for us, and they've moved on to the singular focus on the strait.
But they did it by proxy, right? They did it by proxy. They wanted to see if Lebanon, if Hezbollah could drive that wedge, if Hezbollah escalated and forced the Israelis to respond in Lebanon, and that would drive a wedge. And you're correct, Secretary Rubio masterfully sidestepped them and circumvented that. That leaves only their direct escalation from Iran. I mean, certainly they could have, the militias in Iraq once again, but the U.S. military is poised pretty well, and there's an interesting crackdown going on inside Baghdad right now, which is an important factor that they're watching as well. The Houthis certainly could open fire, but the Houthis have only done it once or twice throughout the entire war. They sort of know the Israelis have the ability to make them pay for it too. Once upon a time, just whatever, a year or two ago, they wiped out half the cabinet in a meeting. The Mossad has clearly penetrated Yemen as well after seeing what had happened, post October 7th with the Houthis continuing to fire. So that's just an interesting dynamic that the Iranians are seeing, which could factor into whether or not they want to be the ones to climb the ladder rather than respond from an American targeting or Israeli targeting pretext, because there are now other actors that are willing to get into the act. So that could be keeping the decision making in a box. I think we have to consider the fact that the Iranians fear the people quite a bit. And if people are out in the streets, what is happening right now in the population? It's a picture we just don't really have a full understanding of. If the economy is going to continue into a downward spiral from the blockade, this is going to factor into the decision making of what they can do and how far of a runway they have to continue to escalate. On the U.S. side, to some of your questions, have we figured out solutions to military challenges from the major military operation period? On the offensive side, do we think we have studied a little more these underground facilities, the missile cities, command and control bunkers, a nuclear site like Pickaxe Mountain? These are sites that either were attacked and reattacked and clearly not penetrated, or like Pickaxe Mountain, never attacked in 2 years of operations because of how hardened and how underground it is. Do we think we have military solutions to some of these sites? If we can go back to the missile cities right now and take out another couple thousand of missiles, right, and all the launchers that are hiding down there, or we can go into anybody's command and control bunker and take them out, I would imagine CENTCOM would be preparing to do that. It was not accomplished clearly in Epic Fury, which led, I think, to the assessment of diminishing returns of continued major operations, which led to the ceasefire.
And just to
Yeah.
be abundantly clear on this for everyone, there's been a lot of assertions and debate in the media around what was accomplished or not on the missile and drone sort of front. And you laid it out at the beginning that the focus was you have the stockpiles, the current inventory and the like, which you're speaking to now, that is often buried, hardened locations. But then separately, you have the industrial base, the production capability that was a target in the initial campaign and was, I think, by all accounts, just like eviscerated. But it was that capability, that production capability, that was starting to go exponential with the help of China
Exactly.
ahead of the war. That was really what instigated action in a significant way here.
Exactly. Completely correct. On the defensive side, you've raised this. We clearly saw drones being a vulnerability in our air defenses and in our allies' air defenses, which is basically our shared air defenses. Have we solved for that at this point? We have seen open source reports of the Ukrainian proven battlefield counter drone technology being fielded and sent on an emergency basis into the Gulf. Was that able to scale over just a few weeks, months? Does the Gulf feel that they have enough of the Ukrainian capabilities in place and they've trained up on them to actually face off at this point? Don't know. Seems unlikely that you would be able to scale that fast, but there might be something, at least in the most critical of infrastructures, like the desalination plants. Are those fully protected right now to the best you can with counter drone, et cetera? Does that change the posture of your MBS, from where you were a few weeks ago? Maybe. I'd also point out that, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles remain some of the weapons of choices that the Iranians use to respond right now against U.S. bases throughout the Gulf. You see a lot of those intercepted. Some of them do not get intercepted. And while, of course, we don't have a 100% interception rate in our capabilities, we should also consider the possibility that every time you hear about a hit, doesn't necessarily mean the hit wasn't sort of allowed by the U.S. Or allied air defenses. The Israelis, understanding the volume that they took from Hamas in very low-cost weapons using the Iron Dome system, and then applying that same thesis with the Shahabs and others that were coming from Iran in the more recent conflicts, basically made decisions using the computer algorithms of calculating where is this missile going to land. If it's going to land in a very specific spot, we need to try to intercept it. If it's going to hit an open area do I need to waste the interceptor, the cost of the interceptor, to try to take down this missile, or do I let it just go land? It's going to create some damage somewhere. It's not going to be great, but it's not going to be mission critical. At some point, if we have inventory issues at any point in our stockpiles for our interceptors, or we're worried about cost, that's also a factor that could be coming in for use for the U.S. military if you're looking at some sort of escalation going forward.
Richard, let's pursue a thread you talked about briefly, and I think I might have an argument with you here on
a fault line. A fault line, perhaps
a fault line. There are some in Iran, right? We know this.
Yes.
The Iranian people seems to me are the ultimate wild card here.
Yes.
And we're playing a game of poker to some extent, and so their card could be the one that matters, is likely to be the one that matters at the end of the day. And we've seen them be very active recently. At the beginning of this year, massive protests in Iran against the regime. The regime responded by killing, evidently, tens of thousands of their own people to suppress these protests against the regime. Nothing since the U.S. has started military action in the last few months.
Yep.
It seems to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that and by the way, I agree with your assessment of the current situation with respect to the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz and that kind of thing. It seems like we're in a pretty good spot. I worry about ongoing conflict, ongoing military activity being the thing that suppresses the ultimate card being played, which is the Iranian people. And as long as the government in Iran, the regime in Tehran, can tell its people, hey, we're fighting the great Satan and the little Satan at the same time, the U.S. and Israel, they're attacking us, we are defending you from them. They have like kind of an additional ability to suppress or to avoid the people rising up in the streets that they otherwise wouldn't have. In other words, yes, it's good that it turns out we can regulate, at least at this moment, and you're right, things could change. We're regulating the Strait of Hormuz in a really positive way for us right now, it would seem. This can continue, really maybe changes the game board on the negotiations. But we may be forestalling the thing that could really benefit us, which is, at the end of the day, you're only probably going to see regime change in Tehran if the Iranian people do it themselves. And are we postponing that by continuing this military, by continuing a kinetic situation with respect to military activity, that without that, we might be accelerating a rising up of the Iranian people?
I think maybe that also I'll just pile on, that begs the question of like, what are the president's objectives at this stage? Is it, he can't control if the Iranians are going to shoot at ships in the Strait and has to respond to that. He's obviously taking some of the military campaigns about trying to get them to stop doing that. But is that all we're fighting about at this stage? Is it, if that gets resolved, are we walking away to some degree and creating the space Les is talking about, or are we going to maintain? Is the president in posture of maintaining military pressure until we get all the nuclear material out of the country and whatever else is on his list?
All right, let me take the second question and back into the first. In my view, absent knowing something that we wouldn't know, which is some sort of a finding that's been, signed off by the president. He actually has a regime change strategy underway covertly. He does say publicly, he said this multiple times, including in recent days, that the people need guns, that if the people had guns, maybe they wouldn't be afraid to come out to the streets. As if he wants them to have guns. So the question, of course, is he doing anything about that to get them guns? And who is the they, of course, or the Israelis doing something? We don't see that. We don't know it. So just sort of pin that in the back of your mind. Absent that, we know that he has been laser focused on the enriched uranium material inside the country. He's talked about it a lot. Now, it is possible that as these negotiations have gone forward and it's been pretty clear that the Iranians are not going to just negotiate away and just say, hey, come on, we'll let you dig it all out for us and take everything you find. And in fact, that's unlikely to happen. We have seen now a little bit of a pivot in the strategic communications over the enriched material from where we were a few weeks ago till today, with increased leaks and reporting and discussion, even openly by the president, where he says it's so buried they can't get it. They would need the United States or Israel to actually get the material out of the tunnels.
Or China, I think he said.
Or China, right? It's possible. That is possible. I've seen a little slight different reporting out of Israel, which is to say that they would not be able to accomplish it without a lot of time going by, that everybody would see what they're trying to do and then be able to bomb the site, which may be sort of the more precise assessment of what's going on here. So he may not have sort of an imminent view of, if I don't get the enriched uranium, like, we haven't been successful. There is ongoing, satellite imagery, commercial satellite imagery that you can look at online from what at the Good ISIS. This is David Albright's outfit, former weapons inspector, has, proven just to be one of the best, if not the best, open source analysts on the Iranian nuclear program and missile program, their sites and activities over many years. Somebody, I think Les and I had him in the office, years ago when we were on the Hill, House and Senate, has just consistently called this right and been ahead of the curve with getting commercial imagery and seeing it all. They've pointed to 2 sites of concern where there's something going on. The president has addressed one of them now in recent days. One site is Pickaxe Mountain. I talked about it. That is what we believe to be a future enrichment, if not breakout site. That's deeper underground than Fordo was, which was the target of last year's Operation Midnight Hammer. It's supposed to be more hardened of a facility as well. It has never been targeted by the air or sea by the United States or Israel last year or this year, which has raised questions of whether or not we think we can actually degrade the target without being on the ground and getting inside of it. And then so the Iranians are doing something there right now, and we're not sure what they're doing to try to either race forward completing the facility, moving things into the facility, preparing for a potential breakout in the future. We just don't know. And so that is something that's on the radar of the president, according to his own statements in the last couple of days, which could be a military target to at least cut off their ability to keep working on it. And the other part is sites where we believe a complex that has been used for weapons development in the past, called Parchin. And there's additional trucks and people and commercial imagery around there. And the president was asked about it, and he said, we think they're just sealing it up so that we can't get to it. Could be. But clearly, this idea that he keeps talking about, they cannot build a nuclear weapon is on his mind, that he's really cut off all the different escape hatches, optionalities that the Iranians have to move towards even a crash breakout program on his watch or for the foreseeable future. So as long as he feels confident there, I think that is a major check the box on what the objective is here. So it may be unfulfilled at the moment, but perhaps could be fulfilled soon. Obviously, if he got the enriched uranium material, that would be really checking the box, on all the missing aspects, but we're not there. The missile program, no one talks about like, oh, this has reconstituted over here already, or, oh, they're back on track with their missile production. So at this point, that would seem to be a strategic objective, which was, as you talk about, primary to prevent the sort of missile breakout as a cover for a nuclear breakout has been achieved. And so all you really have left, unless you were looking for regime change, end of sponsorship of terrorism, all the, rainbows and unicorns that don't seem possible, this is about at least getting the Strait of Hormuz open. But the next piece of it is twofold. One, you don't get sanctions relief just for, the strait being open, which is what it's supposed to be, and still hanging on to enriched material and not letting inspectors into sites and still sponsoring terrorism and, all the things that Iran still does as a terrorist group running a country. So I would expect, our maximum pressure sanctions framework to stay. How long would the blockade stay? Would he ever lift the blockade for something in the future without any further, stuff? Or is it just the Strait of Hormuz? There are some realities of the U.S. Navy and our posture of how long we can sustain a blockade like this, all focused in the Arabian Sea, probably toward the end of the year. But if you really keep all these assets on station much longer, you run into a lot of training problems, and that's going to have a real atrophy effect on the force. And so at some point, CNO and others are going to be knocking on the president's door saying, Mr. President, we got to wrap this up at some point, or you need to redeploy somehow. So I don't think the blockade could just be on for 4 years, 2 years, a year. That has a clock on it. So we should factor that into our long-term planning. And that means you have still some time in front of you, could be months, to keep the pressure cooker on, to keep that Anaconda strategy on. And then we go to Lester's question of, if this is the strategy for a while, are we delaying something on the Iranian people or not? And I would say depends on what military action looks like. I don't buy into, I've never bought into, and I actually think that the last few months have proven this out. I don't think the president believes this at all, that there's any sort of rally around the flag of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I don't think that the people are not rising up now because those, bad Americans and Israelis are beating up, what's left of the IRGC.
I agree with that. I do think we saw a little bit of, their sort of Burning Man festival they had for a week over Khomeini's, burial, and got a little high on their own supply and started firing at ships again. So I think there was a little enthusiasm for the fight and for the regime against the U.S. At least some stiffened spine or whatever, or some eagerness for the fight. But I agree. The rally around the flag doesn't seem.
They have a core. They have a core number of supporters. It is not a majority of the population. It is a minority of the population. There is some devoted, segment of the population that will, stand with the Islamic Republic. And if you offer in an environment of 100% inflation rate on all, consumer staples, basically like free food and drink and giveaways, like it's Black Friday sales, like the door stoppers and stuff at the soup, at the store, like come to the funeral, you'll leave a rich man, free food, fill your kitchen for a month. I'm sure you can get a lot more people too, besides just the faithful. So I am more concerned about major military operations depresses people in the streets, depresses, demand in the economy, all those sorts of things. So you do provide some relief to the regime because people are stuck in their homes.
That's right.
They're not out. They're not driving. They don't need fuel. So there is both an economic benefit and the actual physical benefit of them being off the street. But fundamentally, the question is, if we still believe and know that most of the population hates the regime, they hate them forever. If they didn't somehow already hate them after 50,000 people got mowed down, you don't just be like, man, that was terrible, but like, hey, the Americans and the Israelis, that's not happening. So if there's still a motivation to do something and there's nothing happening, most likely it means that it's because people are really afraid of getting mowed down another 50,000, which is a pretty legitimate fear, I would imagine. Where am I going? The Americans haven't come to my house to rescue me. There's nobody who's going to save me except myself. I don't have guns. And
we told them to wait until the fighting was over, and then fighting didn't stop. So, hey, as running low on time here, Rich, I think it'd be useful to zoom out a little bit and talk about what's the dynamics across the broader region and how the region is reacting to this war. I think, unquestionably before going back a year or what have you, going back to October 6th, I guess, Iran was clearly a power on the rise in the region, and a very substantial force to be reckoned with by anyone in the region, not just Israel. And that created dynamics over a number of years. You saw the Abraham Accords. You saw this sort of lean into opening up relationships with Israel, maybe some more alignment with the U.S. I think since the war, or since the last year, and then since this most recent war, it's a little more chaotic. You have the UAE is sort of at one end of the spectrum. Saudi seems to be trying to find its bearings, but is reaching out to try to develop kind of new, potentially new security architectures in the region, outside of the U.S. or next to the U.S. or who knows what exactly they think might work. But what do you see happening on those fronts?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a lot of hope, though there have been a lot of delays and confusing signals, I think, coming out of the region. Um, the Saudis started moving into a real hedge mode before October 7th. We saw this through the Biden administration, as President Biden had put his distance between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Democratic Party, was in a real backlash against the Saudis after the Khashoggi killing, and sort of like, we're going to make MBS a pariah. This is said publicly. Real distance being put. The Houthis come off the terror list very quickly as part of a reset of the Iran policy, which of course is, sort of on the other side of where MBS is at that point with Iran and the Houthis. There's coming in of missiles. We've pulled the THAAD, out of the region, out of Saudi, and not responded when Abu Dhabi's coming under attack from the Houthis. So there's a lot of consternation already happening, and the Saudis decide to sue for peace, basically, to preserve the investment environment of Vision 2030. And that's how we have in early 2023, 2022 into 2023, this China brokered truce between the Saudis and Iran, but really the Saudis and the Houthis, which has held until the last week or so, which I think we'll get to. That already starts moving the Saudis into this, hey, we're just the Middle East love machine. Saudi first is our policy. America had America first. We have Saudi first. We're going to look out for
the India of the Middle East, or
we're going to be okay with everybody here. We have no enemies. We only have friends. So that's their posture already going into October 7th. And then October 7th happens, and now you have obviously a war going on in Gaza. It's getting very intense. Al Jazeera, Turkish media, mainstream media is just starting to salivate over this, and the noise level going on that is, hostile to Israel in the middle of the campaign in Gaza continues to get more and more and more visible, and it's hard for any Arab leader to ignore that. That obviously creates a major hurdle in any further movement on normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, though I think that was already starting to move apart before October 7th for the reasons we talked about. And then, you go further through the war and into 2024 and beyond, into modern days you talk about, with Iran now really making its own strategic errors, going from a rising power and potential, hegemony in the Middle East with its ring of fire surrounding Israel and all of its proxies, and forcing the Saudis to sue for peace, and forcing the United States out and to turn back to a JCPOA type framework, to all of a sudden, Assad's gone, Hezbollah's cut down a size, the Iraqi militias are under pressure from a new Iraqi government. The Houthis have, now been in battle a couple of times and might be in some way deterred by the Saudis, the Israelis, the Americans, or at least be put in check. And now if there's no air defense for Iran, the missile program's been eviscerated, the nuclear threat is no longer on the table. They have the Strait of Hormuz. That's their last sort of card. Who's benefiting from this? Who's the now rising power of the region? Well, that obviously becomes Turkey. Turkey, the patron of the new Syrian leader, marches on Damascus to begin with. You see the American posture, our ambassadors and our envoys like Tom Barrack now seeing Turkey as the new overlord of a trans-regional area from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to the Iranian border.
What's old is new again.
Yeah. So So if you're the Saudis looking at all of this, and then you add in one more piece of the equation, the numbers are not adding up for Vision 2030 on the time frame that perhaps was envisioned, and the transition is probably closer than you think it is, with the king who's pretty up there and has been ailing, and MBS now really seeing in the midst of Gaza and October 7th, the rise of Turkey, all these things happening, U.S. policy being all over the place, really sort of a question mark of like, you know what? It's just, this is not the time for big, bold moves. This is the time to try to make friends with everybody and see how you can do with that. And so I think that accounts for sudden outreach to the Turks that had been a hostile relationship for a long time. Khashoggi, right? We talked about it. Like, how did that happen? How did that get out? I mean, not the actual murder of Khashoggi, the revelation of it by Turkish intel, perhaps, and the decision to unveil that. No love lost for many, many years between the Saudis and the Turks, and obviously the Turks, in cooperation with the Qataris as Muslim Brotherhood sponsors, being instigators in media, etc., undermining the kingdom and the Saudi, for the Saudi regime. All of that has been factored in here, and yet here they are trying to find a new way forward. They want to have a hand in Syria. They want to have their hand, as they've always had historically, in Lebanon, but now recognizing this Turkish potential meddling. They have major investments in Iraq, but they see, the hand of Erdogan now as well. So all of these things, I think, add up to taking a deep breath, understanding that I think this is all about the transition for MBS to be king, and the fact that the Saudis have to come away from this conflict seeing in the end they don't have the Chinese to help them. They don't have the Russians to help them. The Iranians are going to keep attacking them whenever they can. The Turks aren't going to do anything that actually helps them. If anything, they sometimes get into bed with the Iranians. In the end, they must know that their core interests are only served by the United States and Israel as powers in the region and in the world. And so I do think MBS has to know that. He has to know that, even if he can't act on that at this point, or won't act on that at this point. And he still wants things like nuclear cooperation with the United States. He still wants a defense treaty with the United States. Those things are still on the table in the back. We've heard that Senator Graham, before his passing, was still working on, cooking up some of these deals for after the midterms. So I'd say stay tuned on what that looks like. And the other piece of hopefulness, I would say, is the UAE. The UAE now breaks out of OPEC, announces they're halfway through constructing a second pipeline. They're going to go to max, export capacity, 4 million barrels per day. They've doubled down on the relationship with Israel. They actually hosted the IDF and an Iron Dome battery in the UAE to help defend UAE, which was the most attacked country of all of them in the Gulf over the course of the conflict. That they emerged there forever grateful to Israel and wanting to deepen that relationship. So I am hopeful. I mean, there's a lot of things happening in the region, infrastructure-wise. There's obviously going to be a major de-risking of Hormuz we haven't talked about, with pipelines getting built in all different directions, connecting the region in different ways. You have what's happening in Greece and the U.S. strategy for Europe that runs through Greece for the a new gas corridor to deliver American LNG to parts of Europe to get off permanently of Russian gas. That corridor also goes eastward across Cyprus, potentially into Israel, connects again into the Middle East. Things that are happening in Azerbaijan and Armenia as a result of the peace deal brokered by the Trump administration, and now Yerevan getting closer to Jerusalem for the first time in my memory. We've always known about the Baku relationship, the intelligence relationship there. Armenia has always had a pretty strained relationship with Israel and a closer relationship for its own, can defend, you can try to rationalize it. They have an embargo from Turkey. They've a war potentially with Azerbaijan. Like, who are they going to trade with? They've had some pretty problematic relationships with the Iranians in the past. The Israelis just came out a couple weeks ago and said, we recognize the Armenian genocide. Right. So in the same way they doubled down on their relationship with Greece over many years, now they're doubling down on Armenia. Again, a byproduct of whose rise? Turkey. And so it's more complicated than people see, in the news. Is Israel totally isolated, or as you say, are regional alliances shifting in interesting ways?
The new Ottomans. Rich, I got to call the ball here, which is a shame because this was great stuff. I feel like there's even more topics we didn't cover than we did cover. Maybe the next time we have you on, we go for like 2 hours or 3 hours instead of just
like the Joe Rogan experience.
with less
something like that.
About
fewer,
Epstein
fewer
next time.
Maybe we get JD on here too and really dive into some fun stuff. We didn't talk about the Isaac Accords, the son of the Abraham Accords.
That is a wonderful accord.
Yeah, we didn't talk about President Trump and his communicating. By the way, folks, we're recording this actually on Thursday. The president's making a speech tonight. Everyone thinks it might be about the legitimacy of senators from the state of Georgia. It could easily be about the Iran war, or about both, or about something completely different. We don't know. The podcast will appear on Friday, so we're a little bit ignorant of what the president says tonight. But I think there's things to talk about the way the president has communicated about this war and how that leads up to the November election in the United States. And the different positioning, some of the things that Democrats have done recently, fascinating. Republicans also. Future of the role of China and Russia in the Middle East. We could talk about Israeli internal politics, were also fascinating on their own level. There's really just a ton of stuff, Rich. I thank you for joining us and spending some time with us. John and I kind of imagine this as a deep dive into more than our usual 3 times a week kind of superficial 8 minutes on a hot topic. This was, and you did great.
I've never viewed you guys as superficial.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Efficient. Maybe I would just say efficient.
All lines sometimes appear superficial, but the podcast never.
Yeah, we don't. And sorry, Fault Lines fans, we didn't really have any real fault lines on this episode.
You had a faux fault. You had a faux fault line.
Faux fault. John, do you have
thrown in just for effect?
A final comment or two?
5 times fast.
No, I just think this, all of this is liable to change dramatically, by next week. So we may have to have you on again.
All right. Rich, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That's a wrap. Thanks to Hannah Haynes, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Friday, July 24th for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. We're on YouTube. Check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.